Everyone expected her to take the millionaire's ring. She didn't. He felt the ring slip from his pocket. Not a sound, not a warning, just that sudden lightness where weight used to be. His hand froze before his mind caught up. A diamond engagement ring. Gone. It wasn't meant to be offered. It was never meant to be seen. Somewhere inside that crowded thrift store, between forgotten objects and careless footsteps, right where chances disappear. Daniel Harper stopped walking, turned around slowly, his heart pounding harder than it had in years, not from fear of losing money, from fear of losing timing. That ring wasn't just expensive, it carried a future he wasn't sure he still deserved, a question he kept delaying, a promise still sitting in his chest, unspoken, unresolved. 3 aisles away, Megan Calloway bent down. She picked up something small and cold from the floor. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Just another piece of jewelry. Nothing that should change a life. She didn't smile. She didn't hide it. She simply held it for a second longer than usual, because even without knowing its value, she felt its weight. If you believe in compassion and the quiet strength of ordinary people, take a moment to like and subscribe. Stories like this remind us how one small act can change everything. Daniel scanned the floor, panic tightening his jaw. Too many people. Too much noise. Too little time. The kind of moment you don't get back. And the woman holding the ring. She hadn't noticed him yet, hadn't seen the fear in his eyes. But in the next few minutes, she would face a choice no one expected. Daniel Harper stood still in the middle of the thrift store, trying to slow his breathing while people moved around him like nothing had happened. The place smelled faintly of old fabric and cheap detergent, the kind of smell that made time feel stuck. He looked out of place without knowing why, dressed too neatly for a store like that, yet carrying the weight of someone who hadn't slept well in weeks. He wasn't supposed to be there that morning. Daniel usually stayed in hotels with marble floors and silent elevators, places where nobody noticed you unless you asked to be noticed. But something in him had pushed him off his usual path that day. He told himself he just needed air, something ordinary, something that didn't remind him of deadlines and expectations. Across the store, Megan Calloway moved carefully between the aisles, holding a short list in her hand. She counted prices quietly, doing the math in her head the way she always did. Every dollar mattered, and every choice carried a small tension that never really went away. Her life had taught her to be alert, practical, and fast. She wasn't looking for surprises. Megan was there for basics, for things her kids needed that week, for anything that could stretch her budget just a little further. The ring rested unnoticed in her bag as she compared 2 jackets, her thoughts already moving to dinner plans and school schedules. She had no idea yet what she was carrying. Daniel bent down, scanning the floor again, his jaw tightening each time he didn't see what he was hoping for. He replayed the last few minutes in his head, trying to remember where he had stopped, where he had turned. The ring wasn't just missing. It felt like something had been pulled out of him without permission. People brushed past him, apologizing without really looking. A clerk walked by, pushing a cart, humming softly. Life continued in small, careless motions, completely unaware of the quiet storm building inside him. Daniel felt invisible in a way he wasn't used to, and it unsettled him more than he expected. Megan paused near the accessories shelf, feeling an odd heaviness she couldn't explain. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder, unaware that the object inside was already changing the shape of her day. She told herself she was just tired, that long nights had a way of making everything feel heavier than it was. Neither of them noticed each other yet. 2 strangers moving through the same space, carrying different kinds of weight. One was searching for something he feared he'd lost too late. The other was about to face a decision she never planned to make, and the moment they crossed paths was getting closer. Daniel finally accepted what his body already knew. The ring was gone, not misplaced for a moment, not hidden under a rack or kicked beneath a shelf, but truly gone from his control. The realization settled slowly, heavier than panic, heavier than fear. It felt like the exact moment when something fragile finally breaks after being bent for too long. He leaned one hand against a metal shelf, pretending to browse while his mind raced ahead to everything that ring represented. It wasn't about proposing anymore. It was about whether he still believed he deserved to ask someone to build a future with him. Losing the ring felt like a verdict he hadn't asked for but somehow expected. Across the store, Megan reached the checkout counter with her small pile of items. She placed them down carefully, lining them up in a way that kept her spending under control. As she opened her bag to reach for her wallet, her fingers brushed against something cold and unfamiliar. She paused, confused, and slowly pulled it out. The ring caught the light in a way nothing else on the counter did. It didn't sparkle loudly or beg for attention, but it didn't belong there either. Megan stared at it for a moment, her chest tightening as understanding settled in. This wasn't costume jewelry. This wasn't something forgotten without meaning. Her first instinct was disbelief. Her second was silence. The cashier was distracted, counting change for another customer. No one else noticed. Megan felt the weight of the moment press down on her, not as excitement, but as responsibility, the kind that arrives without warning and refuses to leave. Daniel approached the front of the store slowly, his steps measured, his face carefully neutral. He didn't want to draw attention, didn't want pity or help. He just needed to ask one simple question and hope it hadn't come too late. Each step forward felt like walking toward an answer he wasn't ready to hear. Megan closed her hand around the ring, her heart pounding harder now. In that brief space between noticing and acting, 1,000 thoughts crossed her mind. Rent, groceries, bills she kept pushing forward, and the quiet voice reminding her that no one would ever know what she decided next. The moment hung between them, stretched thin by chance and timing. Two lives standing inches apart, both carrying private fears, both unaware of how deeply this decision would echo. Before either of them spoke, the direction of their day, and maybe more, had already begun to change. Megan stood at the counter longer than necessary, pretending to organize her receipt while her mind raced faster than her hands. The ring rested against her palm, heavier than it should have been for something so small. She felt exposed, without anyone actually watching her, as if the silence itself were waiting to see what kind of person she would choose to be. She thought about her kids first, the way she always did when fear showed up uninvited. She imagined the fridge at home, half full, and the stack of envelopes she hadn't opened yet because she already knew what they would say. That ring could change things. Not forever, but enough to breathe again. And that thought scared her more than it comforted her. Daniel stood a few steps away, rehearsing his words in his head while trying to keep his face calm. He felt stripped of the authority he usually carried without thinking, reduced to someone asking for help in a place where nobody owed him anything. The longer he waited, the more he wondered if this was what accountability actually felt like. The store seemed smaller now, the walls closer, the air heavier. Megan could hear her own heartbeat in her ears as she slipped the ring back into her hand, not hiding it, not displaying it, just holding it. She had never wanted a moment like this, one where the right choice felt so painfully expensive. Daniel watched the cashier finish with another customer, his patience thinning even as he forced himself to stay composed. He reminded himself that he wasn't entitled to anything anymore. Not answers, not forgiveness, not even hope. The ring had already left his possession once, and that fact alone felt like a message he couldn't ignore. Megan glanced up and saw him for the first time, really saw him, standing there with uncertainty written into his posture. He didn't look dangerous or arrogant or demanding. He looked tired, like someone carrying more than he could comfortably hold. That made the decision harder, not easier. For a brief moment, Megan considered putting the ring back into her bag and walking out. No one would stop her. No one would chase her down. Life would go on exactly as it always had, just with a little less pressure. The thought lingered longer than she wanted to admit, and then she realized that whatever she did next wouldn't just affect her situation, it would shape how she saw herself tomorrow and the day after that. With the ring still warming her palm and the man waiting only steps away, Megan understood that this wasn't about money anymore. It was about who she would be once she walked out that door. Megan took a slow breath before speaking, not because she wanted to create drama, but because her chest felt tight in a way she hadn't expected. She looked at Daniel again, noticing details she had missed before, the slight tension in his shoulders, and the way his hands kept opening and closing as if he were trying to steady himself. This wasn't a man pretending to care or putting on a performance. This was someone afraid of hearing the wrong answer. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low and careful, asking if anyone had turned in a ring. He didn't describe it as expensive or rare, only as important, and that choice of words landed heavily with Megan. She recognized that tone immediately because she had used it herself when asking for help she didn't feel entitled to. Something in his honesty disarmed her. Instead of answering right away, Megan asked a simple question that surprised even her. She asked him why the ring mattered so much. The words slipped out before she could stop them, driven by instinct rather than strategy. Daniel hesitated, clearly not expecting to explain himself to a stranger in a thrift store. When he answered, he didn't give a polished response or a dramatic story. He admitted that the ring represented a moment he kept postponing because he was afraid of repeating past mistakes. He spoke about loss, about timing, and about not trusting himself the way he once had. Megan listened without interrupting, feeling the shape of the moment change between them. The ring rested between them now, unseen but present, as if it were listening too. Megan realized she wasn't holding power over him in the way she initially feared. Instead, she was holding a piece of someone else's unfinished story. That realization shifted something inside her, making the choice feel heavier, but also clearer. Megan reached into her bag slowly, deliberately, making sure he could see her hand move. She placed the ring on the counter between them, not pushing it toward him, not pulling it back. The act was quiet and unceremonious, but it carried more weight than any dramatic gesture could have. Daniel stared at it, momentarily unable to speak. He tried to respond the only way he knew how at first, offering money in a reflex that came from years of solving problems with checks and transfers. Megan shook her head gently before he could finish the sentence. She told him this wasn't about reward or compensation. It was about returning something that didn't belong to her. Daniel nodded, embarrassed and grateful all at once, realizing that her refusal was its own kind of gift. He picked up the ring carefully, as if afraid it might disappear again, and thanked her more than once. Megan could tell he wanted to say more, maybe explain himself further, maybe apologize for assuming. But the moment didn't ask for more words. As they stood there in that ordinary store, something between them remained unresolved. The ring was back where it belonged, yet neither of them felt finished with the moment. Megan sensed that this decision would follow her long after the door closed behind her. And Daniel knew, without fully understanding why, that this encounter had already changed what that ring would mean going forward. Daniel didn't follow Megan out of obligation or impulse, but because something in him resisted returning to his life unchanged. He walked beside her out of the store, noticing how easily people blended back into their routines after moments that could have gone very differently. The ordinary movement around them felt strange now, like background noise to something more important. For once, he didn't feel the urge to retreat into privacy or distance. Megan kept her pace steady, already shifting mentally back into her responsibilities, but she sensed him nearby. When he asked if she had a moment, his voice carried none of the confidence she expected from someone like him. It wasn't persuasive or expectant. It was careful, almost tentative. That alone made her stop. He didn't talk about the ring again. Instead, he acknowledged how difficult that decision must have been for her, saying it without drama or exaggeration. Megan wasn't used to having the cost of her choices recognized without judgment. She answered cautiously at first, defaulting to reassurance rather than honesty. But something about the quiet respect in his posture made it hard to keep her guard fully up. They walked to the cafe next door, a small place with mismatched chairs and a menu that hadn't changed in years. The space felt neutral, safe in its ordinariness. Daniel ordered coffee without asking questions, mirroring Megan's choice instead of asserting his own. The gesture didn't go unnoticed. As they sat down, Daniel admitted that he didn't know how to respond to what had happened in the store. He said he was used to solving problems quickly, often with resources that insulated him from discomfort. This situation, he explained, didn't allow that. It required him to stay present instead of effective. Megan listened, recognizing the tension between intention and habit in his words. She spoke then, more openly than she had planned, about how tired she was of always being resilient. She explained that strength had stopped feeling like a virtue and started feeling like a requirement she couldn't opt out of. Daniel didn't interrupt or redirect the conversation. He let her words exist without trying to fix them, and that alone felt like support. Instead of offering help framed as rescue, Daniel asked what support looked like to her. The question landed differently than she expected. Megan realized how rarely anyone had asked her that without assumptions. She answered honestly, saying that sometimes support meant space, and sometimes it meant someone staying long enough to share the weight without taking it over. Daniel nodded, absorbing that distinction. He began to understand that helping wasn't about replacing someone's strength with his own. It was about respecting the strength that already existed and choosing not to dominate it. That realization challenged him more than any professional setback ever had. For Daniel, staying present required more effort than he wanted to admit. He had built his entire adult life around motion, momentum, and the belief that value came from progress you could measure. Sitting across from Megan, listening without solving, felt strangely uncomfortable. Yet that discomfort didn't feel wrong. It felt necessary, like a muscle he had avoided using for years was finally being asked to work. Megan noticed his struggle even when he didn't name it. She could see the way he paused before speaking, choosing words more carefully than someone used to being listened to. That restraint mattered to her. It told her he wasn't there to rescue or correct her life, but to understand it. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen without feeling managed. As the conversation continued, Megan shared more about the quiet loneliness that comes with constant responsibility. She talked about how people praised her strength without realizing how isolating it had become. Strength, she explained, often left no room for softness or rest. Daniel absorbed her words slowly, recognizing how often he had admired resilience without asking about its cost. He responded not with reassurance, but with honesty of his own. Daniel admitted that his success had protected him from certain kinds of vulnerability, allowing him to avoid emotional exposure while still appearing generous and capable. Sitting there, he realized that generosity without presence was hollow. It helped, but it didn't heal. That realization unsettled him in ways he couldn't ignore. The cafe around them filled and emptied as time passed, but neither of them noticed. Their focus stayed anchored in the exchange itself, grounded in mutual respect rather than expectation. Megan felt her guard lower incrementally, not because she trusted easily, but because trust was being earned quietly. Daniel felt something similar, a sense that this moment was reshaping him more deeply than any formal turning point ever had. When they finally stood to leave, the air between them carried something new. Not obligation, not promise, just an unspoken agreement that kindness, when practiced without agenda, creates its own form of connection. And as they stepped back into their separate lives, both understood that this decision to stay present, rather than retreat, would echo far beyond that single afternoon. The moment deepened without either of them planning it, not through touch or romance, but through a shared stillness that felt rare and almost sacred. Sitting there, Daniel realized he hadn't allowed himself to be seen without his role or his title in years. He wasn't performing, persuading, or leading. He was simply present, and that vulnerability unsettled him more than any crisis ever had. Megan noticed the shift too, the way the conversation slowed and became less guarded. She found herself speaking more honestly than she usually did with anyone outside her closest circle. She talked about how exhausting it was to always be the strong one, to never let herself fall apart because too many people depended on her. Daniel listened with his full attention, absorbing her words instead of preparing a response. For the first time, Daniel admitted something he rarely said out loud. He told her that success had insulated him in ways he hadn't noticed until recently, making it easier to avoid emotional risk. The ring, he explained, wasn't just about commitment to someone else. It was about committing to showing up differently, with more humility and less control. Megan felt something loosen in her chest as she listened. She hadn't expected to feel understood by someone whose life looked so different from hers, yet the honesty in his voice bridged that gap more effectively than shared experience ever could. In that moment, she realized that connection didn't require sameness, only sincerity. They sat quietly for a few seconds after that, letting the weight of the conversation settle. The cafe around them buzzed with ordinary life, but their table felt insulated from it. Daniel felt a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in a long time, not because his problems were solved, but because they were no longer hidden. Megan broke the silence by asking him what he planned to do next, not just with the ring, but with his life. The question wasn't intrusive, just genuine. Daniel didn't have a clear answer, and instead of pretending he did, he admitted that he was still figuring it out. That honesty felt like another quiet promise. In that exchange, an unspoken commitment formed between them. Not a promise of future contact or defined roles, but a mutual recognition that this moment mattered. They both understood that walking away unchanged was no longer an option. Whatever came next would be shaped by what they had just shared. Daniel felt the weight of that recognition settle slowly, not as excitement,